So, what is ECR? It stands for Efficient Consumer Response and is both a concept and an association. Our vision is transforming the way we work together to fulfill consumer wishes better, faster and at less cost. ECR Community is a network of 20 national initiatives across Europe with a broad and deep membership network of over 1,800 retailers, manufacturers and service providers. ECR aspires to being a flagship for collaboration, both internally between company departments and externally between trading partners. Our main focus areas are people development, enabling technologies, supply side, including supply chain, OSA, shrinkage and managing food waste, and demand side, including shopper marketing, digital and category management. Next slide, please. And it is ECR's history of association with category management that has us here today. ECR has been at the forefront of developments within category management since its inception. The initial 8-step approach to category management was released as an ECR Europe best practice book, and more recently, ECR's Consumer and Shopper Journey Framework advocated collaboration between advertisers, category managers and shopper marketers from both retailers and suppliers. However, we have a new disruptor firmly in play today in the form of online category management. We think it's far too early to be thinking of releasing a best practice approach to online category management due to obvious amount of change which will take place in this area over the coming years. However, we do think that ECR should play to its strengths with respect to our heritage within category management and considering the vast and experienced network of category managers within our membership. Hence, our proposal is to host this series of 3 webinars on the future of online category management. Next slide. In this first session, we will discuss tomorrow's category management today, how brands achieve their goals in a world without planograms and shelves. And the 2 subsequent sessions will be on availability in the online channel and content consideration and the online consumer. But note, please, there will be an opportunity to submit questions and to download the webinar, and we would be delighted to receive your feedback, advice and comments after the event. Next slide. So joining us for today's session are Daniel Corsten, who is Professor at IE Business School. Daniel is a renowned academic. He was editor of the ECR Journal and represented the ECR Academic Partnership on the ECR Europe Board from 2000 to 2005. His most recent research focuses on online category management. He will discuss important trends that are radically changing how brands and retailers need to work together to win mind and market share in the digital economy. Also with us today is Danny Silverman from Clavis Insight, who leads the product and corporate marketing team. Danny has over 14 years of experience in helping brands grow online. In this session, he will give some fundamentals on why traditional category management methods are flawed when applied to e-commerce and offer some solutions. So please enjoy the webinar. Listen intently. Do try to ignore those pesky emails while doing so. And over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Declan. My name is Daniel Corsten. I am professor at IE Business School. I was involved with ECR from its beginnings in the 90s. It was a great success. Thousands of enthusiasts attended conferences, implemented collaborative projects, and overall it was a great spirit of collaboration. Obviously, implementation was sometimes slow. Next slides. More importantly, the global thrust of ECR ended before the digital era really took off. Luckily, there is still a lot of energy in the ECR national initiatives, so thanks for having me here. Next slide. Category management was an important pillar of ECR, but the analog processes and tools were cumbersome. Now they are outdated and they don't work for digital. At the same time, digital is reaching a tipping point. According to the IRI, the consumer product goods e-commerce share will be 5% by 2020 and 10% by 2022. So brands and retailers have to find new ways to collaborate to benefit from that growth in an otherwise low-digit growth environment. Next slide. Let's put the webinars into context. Brands need a growth strategy, and collaborative online category management is an important pillar. In an upcoming book, I will discuss 8 important changes, but today I will focus on 4. Please note that my choice of examples is perhaps not random, but it does not mean that I endorse everything, and more important, I do not say that these are the best cases. As a matter of fact, if you have a good case in your company, we would love to hear about it. So the 4 things I will talk about are intent, from shrinking to glory, to managing for growth, from category management to item profitability, from product supply to consumer direct, and as the outlook from packaged goods to consumer ecosystems. Next slide. Next slide, please. As a first thing, brands need to change their mindset and strategy from shrinking to glory to managing for growth. We know shoppers are changing. Millennials, mobile first, omni-channel retail is here to stay. On the other side, retail is in turmoil. On the one hand, we wake up almost daily to read about yet another disruptive innovation by, for instance, Amazon. But also Tmall, and in Europe, we have a bunch of very interesting retailers that are very innovative as well. On the other hand, bricks and mortar retail is in an unprecedented crisis. Then newcomer brands are threatening incumbent brands that are not only experiencing slow growth, but also this new competition by what they call digital native vertical brands. Overall, in traditional retail, sales are flat and many brands have missed their sales forecasts. But instead of looking for new growth, many of them have resorted to cost cutting and trying to manage earnings by increasing profitability with yet another round of cost cutting. Next slide. But cost cutting and managing for profit to please shareholders is not a long-term strategy. Digital innovation and consumer focus, however, are. Now, a little bit more specific to online category management, I see 3 trends. Danny will talk about this in detail, but in a digital world, brands need less inventory to ensure distribution at launch. In bricks and mortar, retail investments were immense, and many small brands could not afford to push products into the channel. Today, a small brand can create a cult brand, innovative, with social media communication, wait for the demand to pull, and then pull the products from contract manufacturers. Second, category management was, let's be honest, often about grouping products. The more shelf space a brand commanded, the stronger was the visual impact and therefore its sales. But Walmart and Amazon search engines show only the products that are profitable and popular for them. The others are, I will explain this in more detail, they are not profitable. As a matter of fact, at Amazon, they are called crap, cannot realize any product. And these are the products that Amazon considers for deletion. Amazon ranks them down or delists them. Unfortunately, this is true for many slow-moving variants. So the old idea of cross-subsidizing variants to block shelf space is dead. Finally, watch out. Amazon's fastest-growing segment is not the first-party retail inventory model where most CPG brands are, but the marketplace, the third-party marketplace, similar to Rakuten and Tmall in other parts of the world. Next slide. Increasingly, digital native vertical brands steal market share from established brands. Brands can build their own direct brands or buy one that's successfully scaled. 2 examples. Dollar Shave Club is the most popular example, but Unique has been very innovative with a direct model that has successfully challenged other beauty products. They identified an important problem and solved it in an innovative way. Both were recently valued at $1 billion and bought by Unilever and Coty. But there are 2 other related trends. Amazon increasingly sells private label, and this is a form of reverse vertically integrated direct sales. I also know that sales from brands' own websites increases for high involvement products. So knowledge about online category management is important for all these new channels and brands as well. Next slide. Now, let me pull all the pieces together. Business-to-business markets always knew that a product is not just the score and that consumers expect service layers around it. For the typical CPG product, service layers were simply too costly to build. Luckily, important services such as logistics, presentation, and advice were fulfilled by trusted retail partners. Digital has now dramatically lowered the cost of service and engagement to the point that in future, brands will not only provide packaged goods, but will create consumer ecosystems with apps, services, and connected products. Among the many examples, Milo of Nestle stands out with its engagement for healthy kids that includes apps, games, and competition. But all brands are working on these kind of digital ecosystems, and it's just a matter of time until the world of consumer goods has changed, and we are actually at the point where we do not sell packaged goods, but consumer ecosystems. The old marketing adage is truer than ever. Consumers do not want products, they want solutions. And these digital solutions will be delivered in partnership with retail and other service providers. I would like to hand over to Danny now. Thank you.
Great. Declan and Daniel, thank you very much. We're very excited to be here today, and thank you for inviting us. We've been talking about the topic of online category management as it's fundamental to Clavis Insight and the technology services that we provide to our customers. And so we're excited to share with you today a little bit about how we approach online category management and a new, very exciting framework that we've developed to help make the process even easier to wrap your arms around and build a framework for how to build best practices. Next slide. As has already been highlighted already on the call, our roots in the physical store, in brick and mortar, around the 4-foot shelf. And this is what we really understand very well. Unfortunately, growth is harder and harder to find. It's increasingly competitive, increasingly to find more than single-digit growth. And so most manufacturers now have put at least some amount, if not significant amounts of resources into understanding the online channel and taking advantage of the rapid growth that is happening in that space. Next slide. The challenge it presents, which Daniel already highlighted, is that there's a different way of selling online versus offline. In the old way, if you will, in brick and mortar, it's a push model. In digital, mobile, e-commerce, the new way is pull, and I'll explain what I mean by that. In the physical store, we're very accustomed to pushing out displays, shelf tags, promotions, different vehicles and tools to interrupt the shopper's trip and attract them to your product to make a purchase. Unfortunately, and that's the push model. Unfortunately, online, that doesn't exist as readily, and there's a lot more work that's required to get the shopper to find your product. It becomes a pull environment where you need to pull the shopper into your products in order to get them to consider it for purchase. Next slide. And what that ultimately means is that while every online retailer and every brick and mortar with an online website is still selling, as we might think of traditional retail, and you can build the slide out 2 more, please. At the end of the day, what this means is that every item must stand on its own. What I mean by that is when the shopper is shopping for their products, at the end of their decision process, they're looking at a product detail page. What's on that product detail page will ultimately determine whether or not they make the purchase, and as well as whether they even found it in the first place. Even if you have a shopping list, subscription programs, at some point there was a discovery process that involved the product detail page. And so rather than thinking about that 4-foot shelf that the shopper walks up to and can use all kinds of different visual cues to understand the premium products to the store brand or private label products, in e-commerce it becomes every item for itself. Next slide, please. Now, to make this even more difficult, e-commerce is the easiest store check to conduct. And what I mean by that is if you're used to the world of doing physical store audits, you might visit 1 store, 5 stores, 10 stores. Maybe you have a program where there's 100 stores being visited a month to check for things like price and promotions, displays being set up. When it comes to e-commerce, anybody can do that store check. And if there's anybody on the call today who has some responsibility for e-commerce, likely is the case that you've had an email, a call, or somebody come by your office, usually an executive, who's been to a retailer's website and asked a question like, where's our best product? Why is this image out of date? Why aren't we showing up where we should on this key search term? And they might not know much about e-commerce, but that problem has just become on your desk. 1 more build, please. And so the question becomes, what are the right KPIs? When you start to drill into these questions, it just uncovers more and more questions like the tip of an iceberg. So having the right KPIs to get to the root cause and be able to optimize your digital shelf becomes very important. Next slide, please. If this were the physical world, we would be very familiar with the 4 Ps. We think about product, placement, price, and promotion. And what I have here is a little bit of the difference when you look at the push of brick and mortar versus pull online of what the differences are across the traditional 4 Ps. So in brick and mortar, you set your assortment. Maybe it's twice a year, maybe 4 times a year at absolute most. In e-commerce, it's a very dynamic shelf and dynamic product where availability can change. It's harder to keep products in stock. There's a lot more opportunity to customize and specialize the assortment. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that in e-commerce, a lot of retailers have a much longer, if not an endless shelf. In the placement world, we set that planogram, and it's relatively fixed. In the e-commerce world, you have the opportunity at a number of retailers, Amazon in particular, but there's several others who've offered this as well, to list your products across categories and in multiple placements. And this is really to our advantage. If you think about a product, I like to use the example of a nutrition bar that might be good for just nutrition or energy, but it might also have protein in it. And so it could also go in the vitamin section under protein in addition to showing up under snacks and healthy bars. And then also under placement, you think about things like shopping lists and subscriptions. Under pricing, again, a very static world, and in all cases at the sole discretion of the retailer. But in the brick and mortar world, it's a little bit more of a static environment. The world of e-commerce and Amazon, again, in particular, have introduced all of us to the realities of dynamic, real-time price matching that creates quite a new dynamic when it comes to understanding how your products are performing and how you want to be sure that you're optimizing your own, how you go to market with your products, as well as understanding what your competitors are doing. And then in the promotion space, again, we have our playbooks for brick and mortar deals and displays. E-commerce, some of the same exists. Retailer media is certainly there. Digital media is certainly there. But then there's paid search and there's paid placements. A lot more opportunities to interrupt the online path, if you will, and try and get some of your brand in front of the shopper in that more push mindset, but while they're in the process of their own discovery and search. But of course, with e-commerce, we also know there's more complexity. And there's 2 more elements that we add here to complete the picture. The first one is perfect page. In the physical world, your brand teams have taken care of packaging for you. The product ships to shelf and it carries everything the shopper needs to know. The product image, of course, the title, the brand, the flavor, the size, the descriptions, the ingredients, the warnings, the how-to directions, everything you need is on that packaging. And those who sell and handle category management really don't have to worry too much about it other than knowing the pack dimensions when you're trying to get it into that 4-foot shelf. Online, all of that falls onto the e-commerce manager or the key account manager. We need to transfer the product image, title, description, features, product content. All of that has to be transferred into the e-commerce world. Now, the good thing is it's basically a much bigger canvas than we have in brick and mortar. So rather than being restricted to the 4 or 6 panels of your product, you have, in many cases, almost unlimited length of scrolling down in order to add additional content. We also put under perfect page ratings and reviews. Now, of course, ratings and reviews have a lot to do with how shoppers perceive your products and what they're saying about your products. But at the end of the day, ratings and reviews are also a lot about that perfect page. If you don't have enough reviews or if you have very poor ratings, that product page isn't going to come up in search. It's not going to be as easy to find for most retailers. So optimizing ratings and reviews and being aware of that and making sure that you drive reviews programs is every bit a part of making perfect page as the content itself. And then finally, of course, is performance. Now, this goes without saying. It's not that we weren't measuring performance in the world of 4 Ps, but in brick and mortar, where we're very accustomed to our sales and share models, where it's provided by the retailer, great. We have our third parties, might be providing panel data, scanner data, whatever it may be. In the e-commerce world, it's a lot harder to come by. Certainly there is sales and share from certain retailers, and some are more forward-thinking in that than others. But the other one here is share of search. And this is because your share of search on key search terms is your proxy for how you're performing on the rest of the 5 Ps. And I'm going to dive into what I mean by that in just a moment. So let's go to the next slide. What we've done is taken those 6 Ps and organized them into a familiar yet powerful framework that we call Clavis 6 Ps e-commerce intelligence. And we're really working on getting the word out to the industry to establish as an industry standard. And we're already starting to see some of that uptake within the industry, even outside the world of Clavis and our customers, where we're starting to see this enter in the conversation because it's familiar and because it creates that infrastructure on how to optimize. So just to explain a little bit how it works, those first 5 Ps are within the control of the manufacturer. Product placement, promotion, perfect page are obvious. When it comes to price, obviously that's at the discretion of the retailer, but the price that you are providing, the cost of goods that you're providing to the retailer is ultimately within the realm of the manufacturer. Those 5 Ps drive the 6th of sales, share, and search. Now, a lot of us have heard you have to drive search, you have to drive search. It's all about those category key terms. Why is that a performance metric and not one of the 5 Ps? And the reason is, the search algorithm, or the way a retailer surfaces products based on what you're searching for, is their own. You do not, none of us as manufacturers or in that ecosystem community have the ability to dictate where in search your product will come up. You drive the other 5 Ps, you optimize around those, and you work towards your item showing up higher and higher in the rank based on those search terms that are critical to your category. And so it ultimately is a great proxy for performance and how you're doing and optimizing the other 5 Ps. And what I'd like to do for the next few minutes here is just break down into each of those 6 Ps into a few more examples and details and best practices that you can take back and use to start to think about how you would optimize your e-commerce program. So first of all, product. Now, product is primarily about availability, and you can see a lot of the dreaded out-of-stock images that I've brought onto the slide here. Because generally e-commerce runs off a much leaner supply chain or is highly dependent on local stores inventory, if it's store-based delivery or like click and collect, it becomes a lot more of a challenge to maintain those in stocks. It's not the same supply chain as you have for brick and mortar, and it's been very difficult for manufacturers to try and figure out how to properly supply the Amazons of the world and to also help when that click and collect environment is pulling from store inventory. What we recommend if you're just getting started is figure out where that top 20% of your revenue is coming from. I'll come back to this in just a moment, but your top 20% of your revenue probably isn't coming from the items you would expect if you haven't looked at it before. It's not going to be the same as what drives the top 20% of your revenue or the top 80% of your revenue in the offline world. Once you've identified those top 20% of items driving 80% of your revenue, look for the root causes around items that have pervasive stocking issues. Is it your supply chain or is it the retailers, in which case you want to bring them data and evidence to show why they need to increase their levels of coverage. Be sure to use that data, share it with retailers, share it internally, and let your partners on both sides know that we have a lot of data in the e-commerce world. It's much more accurate and actionable than we've ever had in the brick and mortar world. Technology in this case is absolutely our friend. Use the data ahead of holidays and promotions to provide forecasts. A lot of retailers will say, we've got this, we have our algorithm, but almost universally we've heard plenty of anecdotes with almost every retailer where being proactive with the forecast and saying, I understand you have your forecast model. We'd like to share with you some of our projections and let's make sure we're on the same page so neither of us risks going out of stock. And then, experiment with those key products, experiment with new product releases, set achievable targets, and start to dial up the intensity as you learn. Next slide. On the assortment front, again, as I started to just mention, what sells offline well doesn't necessarily sell online well. Now, if it's click and collect or van-based delivery, there will be a lot of overlap. But if it's parcel delivery, which is the Amazon Central model and other pure play central models, you'll find very heavy products at a very low price point or liquids, particularly with hazmat in it, like alcoholic mouthwash type products, will really struggle online. And so you really want to make sure you understand which products are truly your best sellers in the online space and focus on those first. And then from there, you start to look into things like packaging solutions. A lot of manufacturers now have e-commerce ready packaging, which means it's ready to ship without any additional outer packaging. They've come up with innovative solutions to make it more profitable for the retailer to ship. They're offering cases that are ready to ship or ships in own container. There's also opportunities to do variety packs or regimen packs. A lot of times if you're looking at Amazon or other retailers that have a marketplace in the US, Walmart, in the Asia, certainly Tmall and a number of the other marketplaces there, looking at what third-party sellers have created can often give some clues into what shoppers really want. So we've seen customers of ours look at what third parties have done where they've created multi-packs or variety packs, taken that back into their own supply chains and said, this is what we need to go create because this is what our shoppers actually want. They find a way to create it, and they then can capture those sales. Niche items that are hard to find or in limited distribution will often be some of your best sellers online. So work with your brand teams on the life cycle of products. Those products that are destined for discontinuation, think ahead about how you can ramp up inventory so that you can capture that long tail before the product is discontinued. And on the flip side, e-commerce can also often be first to market on new products because the ship time is faster, you can get to shelf faster. So rather than that long amount of time, anywhere from 6 weeks to 2 or 3 months to fill out the supply chain until it gets to shelf, in e-commerce you often can be at shelf within 2 weeks. And that gives you a lot of opportunity to build awareness and demand that ultimately will make that new product launch even more successful for brick and mortar as well. And then finally, this is a tricky place when it comes to financials because trying to do e-commerce specific packaging can be expensive relative to the revenue at stake or available. A lot of manufacturers have come up ways to work in very close partnership with their finance and supply chain teams to build multi-year P&L models that works for everyone. Think about e-commerce for the long term. This isn't a quarter-to-quarter game. It's not a one-year game. You want to be thinking 3 years at the very least. If you're Amazon, they're thinking 5 to 7 years out. Why shouldn't we as manufacturers as well? Next slide. Placement. When it comes to distribution and categorization, first of all, audit where you're currently distributed, where your products are. Also take a look at what your competitors have done. You may be aware of a competitor in your space who's a little bit more advanced and see what you can learn and what you can glean